I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. On today's show, we're going to give you our starts, sits, and sleepers for Week 14 of the fantasy football season. It's likely the last week of the season for a lot of you, or the first week of the playoffs. Either way, it's a crucial week of games. And I'm going to be joined today by contributing writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports, Evan Webb. Evan, thanks so much for joining me on the cast once again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it should be an interesting week of games. Not only is it the last week of the regular season for a lot of leagues, or the first week of the playoffs and some of our big contests, but there's 6 teams on a bye too. So it's a little bit of a hairy week for a lot of owners out there.
Yeah, and I think this is the first time that a lot of owners are figuring out that there are buys on Week 14. So that was a big adjustment this year as well. So yeah, 6 teams on bye. It's a probably the last week to really get in on a lot of these waiver moves, and especially if this is the last week of your regular season. I mean, this is a really important week. So
yep, definitely. So we're gonna hopefully give you some good advice for this week and help you win all those games. So let's jump into it. Let's look at the QB spot first. Who do you like as a start this week at quarterback?
Yeah, I like Trevor Lawrence this week going up against the Tennessee Titans, the Tennessee Titans have been one of the worst passing defenses in the league this year. And Lawrence wasn't great in the last game. He went 17 for 31, 179 yards and a touchdown against the Lions, but he did come out of that game midway through. So I kind of expect better stats. And again, like I mentioned with the Titans, have been one of the bottom pass defenses in the league. And I kind of expect more of a performance closer to what he had against the Eagles in Week 12, where he had 321 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. I think that's maybe not quite what he'll get this week, but I think it'll be closer to that than closer to what he had this past week.
Yeah, and he is battling a toe injury. It looked like he really hurt his knee last week, but he avoided something serious there, and he has a toe injury, but it seems like it's not going to be something that should limit him too much, but that's just something to keep an eye on as well. But I do like Lawrence as long as he's playing it active. My start for this week at QB is Kirk Cousins. I really like him this week. I know he's been erratic throughout the year, kind of been frustrating to fantasy owners. Even with that said, he's 12th overall in fantasy quarterback scoring. He's had some big games, 20-plus fantasy points 7 times. He's capable of a huge game any week in this offense. I really like his matchup against the Lions. They allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 27th overall against the pass. So I think Cousins has one of his big games in Week 14. All right, how about a sit for you at quarterback this week, Evan?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Deshaun Watson. He looked very rusty in his first performance back out there in the game, and he just never seemed very comfortable, and I just don't really see a quick turnaround for him either. Here's an interesting stat for you. I mean, he had a 22% off-target passing mark, which was bottom in the league and was worse than Kyle Allen, John Wolford, and Brock Purdy. So I just don't really necessarily think that I think he's definitely a sit going forward. I get the high ceiling with Watson, but I don't know. I think I just don't really see him being that comfortable this year at least. And then, maybe next year he can kind of get it figured out, but he just hasn't had that much time to, it's a really quick turnaround. So, I mean, I just don't really see him being that comfortable the rest of the way.
Yeah, I agree. He's got to show something on the field before I'm playing him at all. I agree with that. My sit for this week is Tom Brady. So that offense just remains in a bit of a funk. I know they rallied late in the game last week to win, but they did nothing until the last 6-7 minutes of the game. He has 7 games with fewer than 20 fantasy points this year. He just isn't that surefire starter of past years. Again, he still looked great at the end of that game last week, but that offense was in just a tailspin much of that game, and Brady didn't look great. And they have a tough matchup this week against San Francisco. San Francisco allows the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. They've also allowed fewer than 200 passing yards 3 of 5 games. So that defense is really good. I know there's 6 teams on a bye, so it's going to be kind of thin. But if you have better options at QB, I'd consider using them this week over Tom Brady. All right, let's talk about a sleeper. Somebody maybe flying under the radar at quarterback for this week, Evan.
I'm going to go with Mac Jones from the New England Patriots. Trusting Mac Jones is kind of difficult to do just because he's so up and down, and especially if Jacoby Myers does not play in this game. But I do think that there's still upside here, given that the Cardinals defense has not played well, and I think that, the Patriots know that they were really, really bad on offense last week. So I think they're at least I think they're going to have a bit of a bounce back game. And so I think we know that Jones can play well. We saw it on Thanksgiving. I would at least give Jones over a shot, or I'd give Jones a shot over like Deshaun Watson or like a Tyler Huntley or something, especially with all these quarterbacks on buys. I think he's a nice sleeper pick this week.
My sleeper for this week is Ryan Tannehill with Tennessee Titans. I think he's played really well since coming back from injury. I know he struggled last week. That was against a really good Eagles defense, though, on the road. He still has 21-plus fantasy points 2 of his last 4 games. I think he's getting on the same page as some of his young receivers. They're taking a few more chances down the field. They're not just that plow it ahead offense with Derrick Henry. They're starting to throw the ball a little better, and he has a great matchup this week against Jacksonville. They allow the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 29th overall against the pass. So I think Tannehill is a good sleeper for this week if you're looking for a streaming play at the QB spot. Let's move on to running back now. Evan, who do you like as a start this week at running back?
Yeah, I got Deontay Foreman from the Carolina Panthers. He's averaging about 15 carries per game. He did get a little bit dinged up in the game before their bye week in Week 13, but he looks like he's good to go for this week against Seattle. And Seattle has not done a particularly good job against the run recently either. They even gave up a lot to the Rams, Cam Akers and Kyron Williams. So I think Foreman's a good start this week, especially with a lot of guys on bye.
I like to call Dante Foreman Derrick Henry light. He's not quite Derrick Henry, but doesn't catch passes, but he still produces for fantasy teams because he gets a lot of carries, runs hard, runs over people. I like him as well this week. My start is Ezekiel Elliott with the Dallas Cowboys. So he doesn't look like the same player as past years, but even with that said, he is getting it done for fantasy owners. He has touchdowns 5 straight games. He scored at least 15 fantasy points all 5 of those games. He has double-digit carries every game and 15 or more carries 8 times. So he gets a lot of work. They're playing a bad Houston rush defense. They allow 169.1 rushing yards per game. They're dead last against the run. So I think Elliott has another big showing in this one. So again, you might see it, and you see it when you're watching. Might not be the same player as past years. Pollard looks great as well, but Elliott just keeps getting it done, and I would not be afraid to play him at all this week. I think he's a really good play as maybe even a low-end RB1. All right, how about a sit at running back, Evan? Who do you not like?
Yeah, I don't really like Devin Singletary this week. He's getting out-touched by James Cook now, and his points were higher last week than what the game felt like it was for him. He did have a 1-yard touchdown rush, which kind of bailed him out, at least on his points this week. So I just don't think there's that much upside with Singletary. I think his floor is probably higher than some of the other running backs, but he's not going to break out for 18, 20 points either. I think he's just, maybe at best he's a flex player, if you got a lot of guys out, but I just would lean towards keeping him on the bench.
Yeah, James Cook looks like he's got the faith of the coaching staff a little bit. He's getting more work, kind of intriguing to see what he does down the stretch. So be something to watch. My sit for this week is Dameon Pierce with the Houston Texans. So he returned to form last week, looked pretty good. 95 total yards on 21 touches, but that came against arguably the worst run defense in football in Cleveland. Pierce was awful his previous 2 games before that. He had 15 carries for 16 yards against 2 good run defenses, and that's what he faces this week in Dallas. They've allowed just 6 rushing touchdowns all season. They give up the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs. I think Pierce could have another down showing. Again, tough to bench him because he gets a lot of volume, and there's 6 teams on a bye, but I would just temper my expectations for him this week. I think he could have another one of his down games. All right, how about a sleeper for this week at running back, Evan?
Yeah, I got Zonovan Knight from the New York Jets. Michael Carter is coming back, but I don't think that's going to stop the coaching staff too much on keeping Zonovan Knight carries down. I think he's still going to be the starting lead back, even with Carter back, and I think he's a very high floor guy, high ceiling guy as well. And I expect a really close game in this one, and I kind of expect him to be involved in the receiving end of things as well. So I think he's a perfect start for the flex this week, especially.
Yeah, he's looked really good. He's been that 3 down back as well. So kind of intriguing to see what he can do the rest of the way. Could be a fantasy league winner at this point. We'll
Yeah.
see. All right. My sleeper is Jerick McKinnon with the Kansas City Chiefs. He found the end zone last week. He has double digit fantasy points, 3 of 5 games. Isaiah Pacheco is starting, but McKinnon is the guy that finds the field a lot because of his work in the passing game. He's a better pass catcher than Pacheco. He's getting on the field a lot more than he did earlier in the year. And I think the Chiefs could end up dumping the ball a lot more than usual to McKinnon this week against the Broncos, who have a really good secondary. So they could shut down those receivers. I think McKinnon could rack up a few more targets than usual. And I like him as a flex option for week 14 with so many running backs on a bye this week. All right, let's move on to the receiver spot now. Evan, who do you like as a start at receiver?
Yeah, I think a no-brainer this week is Christian Kirk from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, he is getting started a lot in a lot of leagues, but he's also not being started in a lot of leagues as well. So I think, especially against the Tennessee Titans, who have not defended the pass very well, I think Christian Kirk is a good option. Kind of like what I mentioned with Trevor Lawrence. I like a lot of Jaguars offensive guys this week. So yeah, I mean he's been getting a lot of targets recently as well, and I think he's a no-brainer to start this week.
I agree. I think Kirk's a great play, and I like Jerry Jeudy this week. I know the Broncos offense is a mess, but Jeudy is the guy in that passing game for Russell Wilson, in my opinion. Returned from ankle injury last week, 4 catches for 65 yards. He's top double-digit fantasy points for the 3rd straight game in that game. Like I said, the favorite target of Russell Wilson, Cortland Sutton's banged up as well. He might not play, so I think that means more targets for Jeudy. And they're going to be playing from behind in this game against the Chiefs, in my opinion. And they're going to have to throw the ball maybe more than usual. And Kansas City actually has had some struggles against the pass. They allow the 5th most fantasy points for receivers. So I think Jeudy has a really good showing in this matchup against the Chiefs in Week 14. All right, how about a sit for you at receiver, Evan?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the Browns, and I'm going to go with Amari Cooper. He's going up against, again, a good Bengals team. And like I mentioned with Watson, Watson still doesn't look very comfortable out there. And I would just lean towards keeping not only just Amari Cooper, but any Browns receiver on the bench this week. Just at least until Watson can kind of prove it and show that he's comfortable with the offense out there. And again, they're playing a really tough Bengals team that's playing really, really well right now. So I would lean towards keeping Amari Cooper on the bench and, starting guys like Christian Kirk or like who you mentioned as well. I mean, I think that at least as long as Watson's going right now until he proves it, I think it's a good play to keep Cooper on the bench.
All right, my sit for this week is Juju Smith-Schuster with Kansas City Chiefs. He was having a really good season until he got hurt with a concussion, and since returning from that concussion, he has just 6 catches for 73 yards on 7 targets. He's really done little, and he even played a team-high 76% of the snaps last week, still didn't get a lot of looks in that game. And now he plays a really good Broncos secondary, like I mentioned. Denver has been one of the best defenses in football. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to receivers. So until Smith-Schuster gets it going again on the field, I'm staying clear of him, especially this week against a really good Broncos defense. All right, let's talk about a sleeper now at receiver. Who do you got there?
Yeah, I can't stay away from the Jaguars. I'm going to go with Zay Jones as my sleeper. Kind of the same thing I mentioned with Kirk, just for all the same reasons. But Zay Jones, he did exit with a chest injury last week, and he was sidelined part of the game. So his stat total, I think, was a little bit down. But he's going to come back just fine this week, and I think he'll get back around the 7-8 targets around that mark. And again, bad Tennessee defense. I'd say he's probably nothing more than a flex start to me, but I think he's definitely somebody to look to start this week, especially with a lot of guys on bye.
Yeah, he's had some big games this year. I like Jones a lot this week as well. My sleeper is Van Jefferson with those high-flying Rams. You could have Baker Mayfield starting for them tonight. Either way, I think Jefferson ends up leading that team in targets, and I like him because of that. They have a lot of injuries at receiver. Jefferson's kind of emerged as that number one guy. He has touchdowns 2 of 4 games, at least 3 receptions, 3 of those games as well. And while he caught just 2 passes last week, he was on the field for all of the Rams snaps offensively, 100% of the snaps, which is rare. So he was out there a ton. They play Las Vegas this week. They really struggle against the pass, 30th overall. They allow 258.1 passing yards per game. That offense might be a mess, but if you're looking for options at receiver this week, I think Jefferson's a good play. He's going to get some targets in that game Thursday night. So that's tonight that they play. So keep that in mind if you want to use him this week. All right, let's move on to the frustrating tight end position and talk about some of those players. How about a start for you, tight end, this week?
I'm going to go with Greg Dulcich from the Denver Broncos. The Broncos have actually kind of been using him in a wide receiver role lately, and he actually led the Broncos in catches last week. Jerry Jeudy will be available, so I expect maybe the catches to go down a little bit, but I still think Dulcich is still a better option than majority of the tight ends this week. So, yeah, I especially like him going forward over guys like Tyler Conklin, Dawson Knox, those types of guys. So, yeah, I think Dulcich is a good start just for the fact that he is kind of almost playing a wide receiver role right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's a good play this week. Again, game script can factor in a lot of this, and they could be playing from behind, having to throw the ball a lot. My start is George Kittle, who normally you would just start anyway and not think anything about it, but he's actually been really disappointing this year, and lately especially. He has fewer than 6 fantasy points 3 or 4 games, but he does have 12-plus fantasy points 4 times this year, so he's more than capable. I think Brock Purdy, the new starter, is going to be looking for him a lot over the middle. Might not take as many chances down the field. I think he might, throw a lot more shorter passes to the running backs like Christian McCaffrey and the tight end as well, and George Kittle. So I think it's a positive that Purdy is getting inserted as a starter for Kittle. I could see his numbers going up, especially this week against the Bucs. They've struggled against the tight end. They allow the 4th most fantasy points at tight end. So I'm looking for Kittle to have one of his big games in week 14. All right, opposite end of things. Let's talk about a sit at tight end. Who do you not like?
Yeah, I don't like Tyler Conklin this week for the New York Jets. Just 2 catches this week. He really, honestly, his numbers haven't been very good since around week 8 when he had that big game. But yeah, again, just 2 catches last week, and he's facing a good Bills defense, especially a Bills defense that's good against defending tight ends. And the first go-around, he only had 7 yards receiving against the Bills. So I think he's an easy sit this week.
My sit is Hayden Hurst with the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm going to say this as well. He is battling an injury. He has a calf injury, which is a concern. So he's kind of questionable to play anyway. But he's been erratic much of the year. He has fewer than double-digit fantasy points, 4 or 5 games. He's had some good showings at times. Jamar Chase is back, though, getting a lot of targets in that offense. And against this same Browns team that he's playing this week, he had 4 catches for 42 yards against them in week 8, so did not do much against them, fewer than double-digit fantasy points in that game. And the Browns allow the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight ends and fewer than 200 passing yards 3 of 6 games. So I don't like Hayden Hurst at all this week. The injury, the matchup, his previous game against them, I just think too much is going against him at this point, and I would sit him in week 14. Okay, how about a sleeper now at tight end?
All right, Hanan here with me as I try to pronounce his name, but Chigosim Okonwu, I think, is a good sleeper pick this week. I think it's a massive leap of faith, but I think the matchup against the Jaguars is right. And, if there's no Treylon Burks, especially this week, I think the Titans will be looking for more of bigger targets to be going to. And especially Ryan Tannehill likes to lean on the bigger targets out there. So I suspect that he could have a good dose of playing time and deliver some good yardage this week against the Jaguars. You especially are probably good with playing them if your other options are guys like Tyler Conklin or Dawson Knox, those types of guys. So I think, he's a good sleeper pick this week.
Yeah, Okonwu is kind of like Albert O with the way his name's set up with Denver, but it's not quite his first name's not quite as easy. So we got to find a nickname for him. That's a tough one to pronounce. My sleeper for this week is Hunter Henry, another frustrating fantasy player this year, kind of been all over the map. But he's had some big weeks at times. He scored 15.3 fantasy points in week 12, and he followed that with 2 catches on 5 targets last week. So he's been all over the map, like I said, but definitely capable of a big game. You got to love his matchup this week against Arizona. You mentioned Mac Jones as a sleeper this week, and Arizona's been awful against the tight end. They allow the most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. Some tight ends have put up huge numbers against them. So I think Hunter Henry could have one of those good games this week. All right, Evan, thanks for joining me this week. Good luck to you in all your Week 14 games. I know there are a lot of big games out there to everybody, so hope you have a lot of success as well.
Yep, you as well this week, and thanks for having me on.
No problem. All right. This has been starts, sits, and sleepers for Week 14 of the season. Like I said, good luck to everybody out there. I hope you have a lot of success this week. Last week of the regular season for many of you, and I hope you come out victorious and advance on into those playoffs. This has been Jeff Paur with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.